Welcome everyone to this ASU+GSV panel on the future of international enrollments. My name is Karin Fischer. I'm a longtime international education reporter, and I'm excited to be able to moderate this panel. It's a really important topic. Certainly the last 18 months have been enormously disruptive for higher education and for all of our lives. But the dislocation has been especially great in international student mobility. Yet I think that there are some real possibilities and some real outlooks for the future that are quite exciting. And so that we've got this great panel here today to talk about those things. I'm just going to quickly introduce our panelists, and then we'll go right into the conversation. First, Martin Basiri, the co-founder and CEO of ApplyBoard; Clare Rawlins, VP of Student Recruitment and Marketing at Kaplan; Ryan Trainor, CEO of Adventus; Vaibhav Singh, the founder of Leap Finance; and Edwin Van Rest, co-founder and CEO of Study Portals. Thanks to all of you for joining us here today. Look, we've got to talk about it. We've got to start with COVID-19. It's kind of the elephant in the room, but I do hope we'll move beyond it. But I just think we need to talk about the pandemic first. And I wonder, Claire, maybe I can start with you. I'm curious how you think COVID has changed the world of international student enrollment.
Thank you, Karin. A great question. I think one we've all been talking about a lot. I think it's changed international student enrollment in a number of ways. I think it's changed what students look at when they're thinking about where to study. I think never before have things like a country's public health policies or the way a country deals with issues of race and equality become such a part of student decision making. We're certainly seeing now that students are really looking at how vaccine rollouts are taking place, how safe a country is before they decide where to travel. I think it's also changed the way parents and the generation above students perceive digital. I think one thing we saw was that actually the students themselves were quite adaptive when it came to studying online. They live their whole lives digitally, but their parents, other stakeholders were much more dubious about how a digital or a hybrid model. So I think we've seen some fast tracking of engagement across all stakeholder groups for online adaptation. And I could talk much more, but I will pass over to somebody else.
Martin, why don't I turn to you next? I'm interested. Claire sort of started us off laying out some of the challenges and some of the opportunities, and I wonder how you've seen that in the work that you do.
For sure. Thank you very much for having me. She pointed on something that is very, very good, and I want to expand on it. And it's about the experience of both educators and the students went through an online studies and looking at the challenges and the opportunities. So if you look at the world right now, we have about 250 million people that they have access to not any sort of like a higher education. And the whole student mobility is only 8 million students at current. Yes, it's growing at 12%, but the need for the world is far greater, and online could be a very, very good solution for that. And I think what COVID souvenir for the whole world was an acceleration to equality of education, equality of access to education. And that's great news for both educators and the students. The biggest challenge that we know right now, there is a big opportunity, is time zone. What we noticed during that, for example, for North American schools having students in India or China, you could see students have to start their classes at 2 a.m. in the morning, and that brought a huge challenge. I see that as one of the biggest challenge and opportunity for the world of online education to go from synchronous education to asynchronous education or some other format that answer the time zone.
Yes, certainly that is very true. I think you used the word accelerant, and I think that's a really good way to think about COVID-19. I think certainly there are some particular challenges that the pandemic raised, but in some ways it also just accelerated a lot of things that were already within the international student market. And Edwin, maybe I can turn to you next. I wonder if what sort of underlying issues you think that COVID-19 has helped highlight.
Yeah, issues and perhaps also opportunity. So I think echoing, and thanks again for, thanks also for having me, echoing the two previous speakers. I think what we've seen, first of all, if you look at the traditional segment of international education, we see that the demand is very resilient. So the desire to make international education dreams come true for students is stronger than even significant health risk. In 2020, there's only about, if you look at new enrollment, there's only about a 24% drop globally on international new enrollment. And of that, about half of the students started online in their home country. And I think it's actually a pivotal point coming up right now, even though the pandemic for let's hope to the larger, we can leave that behind us now. There's the fall intake coming, and when I speak to university presidents, I hear there are two types. Some say, oh, we tried online education, that was amazing that we did that, but our students didn't really like it. The students are now complaining. We look forward to go back to normal. And there's a truth in that. We have also seen, despite the big success in online education, the traditional student, particularly the international students, still put a lot of importance on going to campus and going to that destination country ultimately. Some other presidents, they say, okay, we know we have the campus is important, but we're going to keep at least some of the things that we've learned and the innovation that we've brought to market to keep online components and to keep a blended offering, whether that's to increase flexibility for the existing, that's again traditional students, but also, as Martin said, to provide new ways of access to whole new segments of students. Because fully online asynchronous learning, it's a fantastic way indeed to provide new access, but it's not fully replacing an on-campus, immersive experience either. These are different target audiences, which are important to fully understand to provide the right product for the right group.
Well, this is a really interesting point, because I feel like not to date myself, but I've been covering this international education for more than a decade. And I feel like there's always been this sort of thought that online was going to be this big disruptor to mobility, and it had not been. But Ryan, I wonder if I can turn to you now and what you see as some of the innovations coming out of the pandemic.
Thanks for that, Karin. It's great to be here with everyone today as well. So thanks very much for the invitation. Look, I think it's definitely sped up innovation. If you think about even just traditionally how institutions have connected with students as well over the time, I think it's enabled us to think a bit more around moving from analog to digital. You've often had a lot of student recruitment staff, travel around the world trying to find different partners to be able to partner with to source these students. And I think now I think it's an exciting time of trust and transparency. I think with the ability to go from digital to analog now as well, what it's allowed is to turn the lights on a lot with data. So for institutions to be able to now connect digitally with not just agents. I think we talk a lot about agents, but I think now we're thinking around counsellors, around how we're going to be empowering counsellors to better serve students for the future. It enables us to be able to access a whole range of data now that kind of turns the lights on for institutions and gives them a whole range of new insights that they may not have been able to get before. And I think as we're moving through this evolution of education and various options, they're being able to access this data to be able to make better decisions around what products, what students to be able to access, what does a successful student look like. And ultimately, I think the student's going to win a lot more because of this time.
Let's talk for a minute about the finances. I mean, I think, in many countries that are destinations for international students, finance, the financial benefits they bring have become more and more critical to the bottom lines of universities. Yet that sort of presumes that it's something that, is an international experience is only for elites. And I wonder, Vaibhav, if I can turn to you, and I wonder if you think that there are going to be changes in the financial models that allow, more access, as we've been talking about earlier.
Yeah, so again, good evening, Karin. Thanks for having me here. On that, absolutely. I think if I could say a systemic shock of the size of COVID will naturally lead to many interesting sort of outcomes on the entire value chain. And as we all, I think, know, financing is often one of the key hurdles or bottlenecks from an international student perspective. Typically, many of them coming from emerging markets would often find, international study expensive. I think there are a number of, alternatives, Karin, which anyways have been sort of simmering for many years. We've spoken about for many years on how sort of outcomes from college for students should be aligned to what they pay for college. ISAs have been around for a while. There's every reason to believe that those trends will only accelerate. I think, as the panel's already brought out, I think innovation in sort of delivering access, part of the course online. Like I firmly sit in the camp that, you can't completely replace the in-person experience. A student wants much more from an international study experience. But hey, doing a few credits here in your home country online, asynchronously at your convenience, not only sort of, is probably easier, it also could be delivered, at sort of, more compelling sort of financial costs to students. So I think we'll see, the pandemics allowed everyone to test various things. One of that is the online model. Obviously, an advantage of online models is just its cost of delivery. And hopefully those benefits pass on to students as well, which, make the entire move abroad, just opens it up to many, many more students.
Let me stay with you on that for just a second, because I think on one hand, there's the potential for access. On the other hand, I wonder if you worry about it being kind of like this two-tiered system where there's sort of a premium model and a model that's for those who can't afford it as well.
Yeah, so absolutely, that's a balance. Everyone in the ecosystem needs to be very aware of and very conscious of. I think, Karin, at least our experience, sending thousands of students abroad, the student today is far well informed than what they were 20 years ago, right? There is just an explosion of information everywhere on the internet, right? So I think, anything which is sort of not in line where a student feels just because, hey, they've chosen a particular path to what in their minds is still the same final destination, leads to different outcomes. I think, that will get called out pretty quickly. So I don't necessarily see this as, I think it'll create only more choices for students. And I think there's enough information available now, and increasingly will be more and more, such that every student can actually take the choice which is right for him or her.
I wonder, I think we think a lot about online education as, quite obviously, remote learning has been kind of remote everything has been central to all of us in these last months. But I wonder if there are other ways and other innovations that you see, maybe not even coming out of the pandemic, but that have maybe shifted the way that international mobility will look. And maybe, Martin, I can throw that one to you.
So if you look at the fundamental need of students when they're going for study abroad, you could see they're coming for the skill set that the program offered to them, but they're also coming for the experience that they're looking for. And what we noticed during the pandemic time, when the program went online, and in fact, like some program, maybe even the quality of education, because students were able to repeat the classes and stuff, was even in the skill set and capturing the education part, the skill set part, the content part was maybe even as good. You could see like a big lack of the experience. That's the other trend and opportunity that was completely left out before pandemic, and we could see like it's coming. And I think it's going to be a huge industry. It's like, what are the other experience of the students that can be filled? Like, for example, like the networking between the students, or the gathering, the feeling that the students can feel that they are welcome, their opinion is welcome. A lot of these things on campus education, they are practiced for decades, but when it came to the online, it felt missing. When we surveyed the students, the experience and the network and friendship, they're missing. And it brought the question of, why should we pay, for example, $20,000 a semester for just the content of online? Because now the experience piece is missing. But back to what Edwin said, the industry is very resilient, and the need for that experience keep going up and up. And thanks to loans, side jobs that students can do through gig economy, it becoming more and more accessible for middle class. It's definitely used to be just a top tier of every country. Now it's like more upper middle class, and I have a big hope that the trend going to a very good portion, that more and more with ISAs, more loans, and colleges and universities come in, step in to make accessibility higher, we could see like the trend go to a good direction. I think by end of the decade, this decade, almost everyone who want to go study abroad, regardless of the financial situation, they could find a way.
I think your focus on student experience is an important one, because certainly what students come to study for is not simply for a degree always. And so Claire, let me turn to you and ask you a little bit about the student experience and how you've been thinking about kind of student well-being in this period.
Certainly, thank you. I think as we think about the sort of experiences that students have had digitally over this period, and the experience students will need to have if we want to use online learning as a way to really increase access. And by increase access, I'm thinking North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, where there are massive populations who will never be served by traditional bricks and mortar universities. I think we'd need to build one university a week in Africa if we wanted to be able to teach the population by something like 2040. And I think one thing we've all seen and learned over this period is that a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging is critical to students, whether they're digital students or on-campus students. But actually, you probably have to put in a lot more work to create that digital community, because it doesn't happen organically. People aren't popping for a coffee, they're not joining a club, but it's still as important. And also that signs of, student mental health is well documented, all around the world as an area of increasing concern. But obviously it's harder for tutors, for people to spot anxiety and depression digitally. So I think it's all about really training tutors and making sure we invest in all of those one-to-one check-ins with students so that they know who to talk to if they're not sure, and making sure that attendance is really monitored and followed up on, because we know both physically and digitally, low attendance can often be a sign of something else. So I think the key is there, it's that sense of community, but also significant investment in well-being services and activities for students to thrive.
Thanks, Claire. Edwin, let me ask you a little bit about what trends you are seeing when you kind of look at the students who are coming to you? Are you seeing shifts? And I mean that in the broadest sense, both in terms of who the students are and what their particular needs are.
Yeah, definitely. So apart from COVID and from the shift to online, of course, what we already discussed broadly, I would say two additional ones. So one is the growth of shorter credentials. Sometimes called the unbundling of the degree. And sometimes increasingly also shorter credentials that are stackable. So the demand for our short courses is growing 3 times faster than the demand for full degrees. Okay, it comes from a lower base, but I think that's definitely something to watch. And if I was a student myself today, I would also shop for a few shorter credentials and get experiences at multiple institutions, ideally in multiple cities. So I think that's a big one. And then the other one is also new destinations. So probably it was the US, the UK, Australia, kind of the most traditional market leaders in the traditional international education. Now, Canada are the new players, but there's also continental Europe and Asia coming on the scene right now. When we started 12 years ago, we had 500. There were 500 English taught degree programs outside of Anglophone countries. The ones, basically the big ones that I just mentioned. Now we have 17,000. So full English masters, but also bachelor's degrees that are offered. And if we talk about accessibility, many of them are even free, fully free of charge. Norway, all education for free. Germany, all education for free for the whole world. Now, still a long way to go for some of these markets in terms of getting a fair share of the market. But we see increasingly students also, China is increasingly becoming not just the source of students, but it's great to see that the student mobility flows are becoming much more symmetrical from the Western world, but also from developing countries. So I think that's really changing the game and also provides a new competitive playing field for institutions, but also lots of new opportunity for students.
Ryan, I'm curious, put the same question to you, building on what Edwin just said. What are some of the things that most stand out to you as kind of changes in the market?
It's really interesting, and I kind of agree with Martin when with students and around experiential as well. I mean, you know, I guess my home country is Australia, and I think sometimes, you know, every decision we make kind of defines who we are. And I think these type of situations, how countries have actually dealt with the pandemic and how they've actually worked through international students, even I guess the approach and even the language that has been used. You know, we've seen, you know, through the platform and a number of offers being offered to students, but there's this kind of delay in acceptance at the moment, looking at, you know, what option they'll actually go for. And I think, you know, a lot of the markets, making a traditional market like Australia, has lost a lot of students to countries like Canada and the UK. And what's really interesting is just the increased interest now in the US as well. And we're seeing a lot of that interest has been shifted away from Australia. So I think what this has actually done is, you know, it's looked at how countries deal with this, and it can have an ongoing effect. We may not even see students in Australia to 2023, right? And a lot of those students, that could have been a generational change potentially as well for some of the students we'll actually see. But I think the other part is because a lot of universities may have had to rush to go online to support students, had to think differently. So this opportunity now for this transnational ability to be doing a hybrid online and then moving to have that experiential experience overseas, I think is going to be this increasing trend, and that allows to access a lot more students from an affordability perspective because they're not paying for, I guess, the living expenses and also potentially some of the costs. So I think you'll see pricing start to change as well based on that. So I think it's ultimately the student's going to win. Countries need to think how they have to react in these situations, but ultimately I think it's still going to be good for the student in the end.
That's really interesting, Ryan. I'm curious, do you think this is a short-term reflection of, trends, or just quite honestly the ability to get a visa and get into a country, or do you think this might be more permanent shifts?
I think it's a flow-on effect, and again, I think when Martin talked about community, when you've got you look at a lot of students and their choices. Often it could have been through relatives or friends or a range of others and their choices that they may have made previously as well. So I think that these kind of these trends can actually have a long-term kind of flow-on effect as well. So I know a lot of the universities in Australia are really kind of putting up their hand at the moment, speaking to the government around that and just saying, hey, this could be generational for some sense as well. I don't think it's all bad, but I think that some of the countries and the way that they've dealt with how they've communicated with students throughout this process may have got a foothold on a traditional country like Australia.
Vaibhav, I see you nodding your head. I'm curious what you make of some of these trends and their durability potentially for and the way that they might reshape the market.
Yeah, so Karin, I think we've heard the word resilience come up 2 or 3 times in this chat. I think from a student-first perspective, I think the word's probably fluidity. I think the desire of a 22-year-old, the ambition of a 22-year-old to sort of go and study abroad and sort of really live the dream is like permanent. That's not changing anytime soon, of course, but given their age, given their ambition, you'd find that they will keep picking what are the best available opportunities at any given point in time. And and we've seen this play out over the last many decades in this industry. Every time, either there is something in how particular countries are accepting international students, how they are, the opportunities they are able to create post-education, all of those have been big drivers, and they significantly influence. And like students pivot intake to intake. I can tell you, for example, given obviously our financing business has a strong focus or strong bias in the India-US corridor right now. Talk about students wanting to go to the US in the last administration in fall 20. You had very different sentiment, and November and things flipped, and this summer we've literally, are struggling to keep pace with the loan applications we've been getting to the US. So, it doesn't take long for students to recognize as well that, hey, things in this particular country, in this particular program, this particular opportunity is attractive for me right now. And so that fluidity, I think, is also a strength of this entire move abroad. And I think that will continue to say, I think trends will keep changing and students will keep choosing what's best for them at that point in time.
Martin, I see you nodding as well. I'm curious what you make of this notion of fluidity. It's
very interesting, like the things that is changing. For sure, we see, like we have seen like a 300% month-over-month growth in our platform for the US. Yeah. And it's like the whole market is shifting. Australia's, of course, like is the lowest right now from the desire point of view, but it takes a couple of years because people follow, like 56% of people follow the classmates, friends, and brothers, and like siblings and stuff that they went and studied abroad. One of the big trend that we could see is trend in the rank of the universities and colleges. So if you go about 20 years ago and before, a lot of the study abroad was financed by either the governments, like for example, Saudi Arabia government, Korea government, China government, or the top universities, mostly in PhD and grad school. And they were giving a scholarship to the students. As the personal financing takes bigger and bigger, as parents were paying, the ROI of education become more and more important. The first big country that took off was China, where we know Chinese parents, they normally have one kid in terms of like for paying education, and they're very sensitive for education. So they have a lot of budget for that. And that up to 2015 gave a very trend of top universities getting especially students from China. It became kind of like a super luxury kind of a thing. And all of a sudden, India came to the game with UK and Canada changed their postgraduate work permits, and it became more desirable and work while studying where students can come, and it go from the luxury to middle class. And now we could see the shift. Now people are asking about the ROI of education more and more, even though they can go maybe to a topper ranked school, but then they look at the outcome. The amount of information that they have, they look at their LinkedIn, they look at the classmates of them, like for the seniors of their school, and they look at it, how much going to this topper school and paying additional $20,000-$30,000 per year will lead to their type of job they're getting. And a lot of times the way that we can see the trend is coming from the top 50 going to tier 2. I don't like the name of the tiering, but I'm talking about going, for example, in Canada from U15 to the major body of the education. And it's very good because it also helps accessibility of education.
So do you think that there's going to be a shift away from kind of that, historic obsession with rankings and this
Absolutely
more sophisticated? Yeah.
Without any doubt. Like all of us are here like entrepreneurs, we are in education companies, but rarely when we are hiring people, we ask them to bring their certificates and transcripts of the school that they went to. We hire them based on their potential and based on the skill set that they have from that point of view. And I think that goes, and you see companies like Google, Amazon, Tesla, a lot of them walked away from that. So as the just importance of having a 4-year bachelor degree, just the degree itself, the paperwork coming down, the obsession about the rank of where that degree is getting issued come down, and more become practicality and everything else. And that's a very, very big opportunity for all type of schools in this decade to take themselves up and to be able to really show the world that they can really like help the students with their success, regardless of how they were ranked for the last 5 decades.
Claire, what did you make of that?
I thought, Martin, you made some really interesting points there. I think, that worldwide obsession with rankings does continue, but I agree there that students are becoming more sophisticated in a number of ways in their analysis of universities. Students want really return on investment on that study. And that isn't necessarily, like Martin just said, based on the ranking. If we look at someone like ASU, who's hosting this summit, that #1 for innovation ranking that they've held for several years, for so many students is critical when they look at the work the university does around innovation, the incubation hubs. It's those kind of things where students see, how will this kickstart my career in whichever way I want that to be? And for a lot of students as well, they really want to see that the university is making strides to be on the right side of history in things such as sustainability, climate change, equality. What are the university's stances and actions in those areas? I think are also starting to influence, not every student, but are starting to influence a number of students in ways that we haven't seen before.
So I'm interested. I mean, this is challenging because if you have all these different factors and all these different sort of forces coming together, I mean, it strikes me that the need to sort of pivot, both on the part of universities, but also in the part of folks like you who work in this space is more intense than ever. I mean, Brian, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? But I think it's I think it's also, we're talking a lot today, and we got to think about the student as well. And I think one of the areas we need to think about is that with this kind of so much information and the democratization of so much information through to students, how are we going to be better at helping students make the right decision at the right time as well? And I think, traditionally, sometimes the industry has always been around selling rather than kind of connecting. And this opportunity now, which we're talking about, is around things like employment data. And, and again, we talk about it sometimes in some parts of the world as the barbecue test. There is sometimes a bias as parents towards what we want our kids to do in the future as well. We would love them all to be, doctors and lawyers, but where are the actual jobs of the future going to be, and how are we going to be connecting them to those jobs in the future? And if I'm a counsellor in a part of the world which is helping a student arguably make one of the largest possibly purchasing decisions of their life, how are they informing them to make the right decisions at that stage as well? And I think there's a lot more responsibility of us now as an industry of the assimilation of the information to be able to pass on to these students to make these right decisions as well. So I think, to be really honest, I know there's a lot of information, but I think we're only about 2 or 3 kilometres into the marathon at the moment. I think there's so much more that we can be doing. And I think we're going through this kind of this period of time at the moment, which is really exciting, but I think we're still not doing enough, and we can still be a lot better.
Let me ask how that might look. I mean, are there ways to, as you said, democratize this information and to give it in a way that's, actionable for students and their families?
Absolutely. And I think it's about how does institutions and I guess platforms, exchanges work a lot better together? What does a student look like who's been successful previously? How are we working with employers now to actually understand future needs and requirements as well? I think data plays a really big role in this, and I think a lot of people talk around AI and machine learning and a whole range of things. But I think there's the simplicity of being able to assimilate the right information to the students at the right time. And, we talk about agents. Agents is just an agency. You've got counsellors, and counsellors can take many shapes around the world. They could be counsellors sitting in secondary schools around the world as well. They could be a whole range of other groups. I think where we really need to be focusing on is what tools and what information are we using to empower them to support the student to make the decision at the right time, and I guess that's how we're continuing to kind of think around that for the future as well.
Yeah, Edwin.
Yeah, no, so I'm happy to add to that and say at least what we are doing in that space. So there's of course already a myriad of data out there. Rankings were used, there's accreditation information, there's also all kind of information that universities are spreading, which is typically around their curriculum and their fees and so on. So that's, many of us collect some of that data and use that, bring that to students. So that's already valuable. What we're doing, which is for the future outlook, is to also really keep track of all the students and their journeys as they move on in their educational journeys and the beginning of their career. So when I went to study in Japan, that's 15 years ago, it took me 1.5 years to find about a option. And I got lucky because I got help from a professor. So I was blindfolded, basically. I think where we are now, there's kind of a map, right? There's a map. We have, for instance, 4,000 universities, 200,000 programs. And students can get their options and supportive data. But the future is Google Maps. So student comes and says, I want to be an engineer working at BMW. And we can plan out the various paths that will have the highest success rate of the student leading in there. And not only based on, there's the Technical University of Munich that has a great graduation rate and not only about an institutional information, but actually based on the data of students like them that have gone through their educational journey and where they got stuck and where they were fast-tracked and where there's traffic and where there's a shortcut. And I think that will really help a lot. It also comes with challenges, some of them moral challenges, but I think it will help a lot to really get that information provision to a whole new generation.
And Martin, let me give you the last word. We've only got about 15 seconds, so a very short last word.
For sure. I think we are in a very, very exciting time of our industry. And everyone, regardless of what they do, but majorly universities and colleges can decide which side of the future they want to be, past or the future. But it's exciting.
Well, I'm sorry. I feel like we could have continued this for quite a long time, this discussion, but thanks to all of you, and thanks to ASU and GSV, and thanks to our audience for tuning in.